The most expensive horse in that barn was afraid of his own shadow, and the woman who owned him had decided that the cure for fear was more fear. I had been cleaning her stalls for 3 weeks, keeping my mouth shut and my hat low, watching her break a great horse the same way somebody had probably once broken her. And on the morning she finally crossed the line, I could not let stand. She had no idea that the old hired man with the manure fork was the one person in the state who could undo every wrong thing she had done to that animal, because he was the one who had made him in the first place. Her name was Vivian Crane, and she owned a sport horse operation in the bluegrass country of Kentucky, the kind with a stone gate and a brass sign and more money in the chandeliers of the barn aisle than most folks see in a lifetime. She had ribbons on every wall and a reputation in certain circles, and a way of walking through her own barn like the horses were furniture that had disappointed her. And she had a horse named Banjo, a tall bay gelding with a white sock and an eye like wet ink, who was, underneath all the fear she had layered onto him, the finest horse I have ever bred in 50 years of breeding them. I would know. I bred him. I just had not told anybody that yet. By the end of the week, she humiliated me in front of the whole barn. Vivian Crane was going to lose that horse, and her reputation along with him, and she was going to lose them in front of the exact people whose opinion was the only thing she had ever truly owned. This is the story of how a frightened horse told the truth about 2 people at once. My name is Cyrus Hatfield. Most everybody has always just called me Cy. I am 55 years old, and I have spent my whole life with horses. The difficult ones mostly, the ones other people gave up on. Because somewhere a long way back, an old man taught me that there is no such thing as a bad horse, only a frightened one, and a person who has not yet earned its trust. And I have never once in 50 years found him to be wrong. For a long time I had my own place, a small operation up in the hills where people sent me the horses nobody else could fix, and I made them right and sent them home. And it was a good life, and it was the only thing I was ever any good at. I lost the place, the way a lot of us lose places. A few bad years stacking up faster than a man can dig out from under, and a bank that does not care how good you are with a colt. By the time the dust settled, I was 55 with a truck, a trailer, a saddle, and a braided rope halter that I will tell you about directly, and not much else. And I was taking whatever work a man my age can take around horses, which is mostly the work nobody else wants, the mucking and the night checks and the hard keepers. That is how I came to be cleaning Vivian Crane's stalls. But it is not really why I was there. I was there because of the horse. Most people have stood and watched somebody ruin a good thing through sheer stubbornness. A good dog, a good kid, a good idea. And been told, in so many words, that it was not their place to speak. There is a particular patience it costs you to keep your mouth shut and your eyes open through a thing like that. Everything that matters in this story happened in the long, quiet weeks while I was paying that price. There is a reason I knew that horse the moment I laid eyes on him in Vivian Crane's fancy barn. And it goes back 8 years, to the best colt I ever raised. I bred Banjo myself, out of a mare I loved more than I have loved most people. And I was there in the straw the night he was born, and I dried him off with my own hands, and I watched him stand up on those long legs and look at the world with that wet ink eye, already curious, already brave in the particular way the great ones are brave, which is not that they are not afraid, but that they want to understand the thing more than they want to run from it. I started him myself, slow, the way you start a good one. Never a harsh word, never a forced thing. And I braided him a rope halter out of soft cotton cord, a plain thing, nothing fancy. And I taught him that when that halter was on, he was safe. That it meant Cy was there and nothing bad was going to happen. A horse remembers that. People do not understand how much a horse remembers. He learns the world through the feel of things and the sound of a voice. And a young horse who is taught, deep down in the place where they keep their first truths, that a certain soft halter and a certain low voice means safety, will carry that knowing his whole life, no matter what gets piled on top of it later. And then I lost the ranch, and I had to sell him. That is the part I do not talk about. I sold the best horse I ever bred to pay a debt that was not his fault, and he was 3 years old and green and perfect and trusting. And I told myself the buyer was a good outfit and he would be fine, and I put my braided halter in my pocket instead of sending it with him because I could not bear to let go of both of them on the same day. And I have hated myself for that small selfishness for 8 years. You have to understand what a horse like that is to a man like me. I never had children. I had horses, hundreds of them over the years. And I loved every one and let everyone go. Because that is the job. You make them right and you send them on. But once or twice in a life, if you are lucky, one comes along that is not a job. That is the thing itself, the horse you would have built if God had let you. And Banjo was mine. Selling him was not like selling a horse. It was like selling the proof that I had ever been any good at the one thing I was put on this earth to do. I told myself all the things you tell yourself. Good outfit. He will be fine. Better than the both of us starving. And I drove away from that sale and had to pull the truck over twice before I made it home. And I never bought another colt after him. Never bred another mare. Because some part of me decided that if that was how the story of the best one ended, I did not have the heart to start another. So when I tell you I took up a manure fork in Vivian Crane's barn to be near him, understand it was never really a job I took. It was the last thing I had left to go looking for, because he was not fine. Good horses sold into the show world get passed around when they do not win fast enough. And Banjo got passed. And somewhere in that passing, somebody decided the brave, curious colt was being stubborn, and they started making him afraid. The way frightened people always make frightened animals. And by the time the trail I had been quietly following for years finally led me to Vivian Crane's barn, the horse I had dried off in the straw was a shaking, sweating, dangerous-looking wreck that 3 trainers had already recommended be put down. So I did the only thing I could think to do, which was take the lowest job in her barn so I could be near him and watch and be sure, before I did anything, that it was really him and that there was anything left of him to save. I did not announce myself. A broke old hired man in his 50s does not walk into an operation like Vivian Crane's and tell the owner he is a legend and her famous horse is his and she is ruining him. You would be laughed off the property, and worse, you would tip your hand before you had any way to play it. So I kept quiet, and I mucked stalls, and every night when the fancy people had gone home, I would stand at Banjo's door and talk to him low, the old way, and I watched, week by week, for the thing I was praying for, which was the moment his ink-dark eye would catch the sound of that voice, and something underneath 8 years of fear would go still and remember. Let me tell you about Vivian Crane, because she is the other half of this, and because she was, in her own way, as much a made thing as the horse. She was somewhere around 50, and she had grown up in that world, a horse show dynasty, a mother who I gathered had been a hard, cold, ribbon-counting woman before her. And Vivian rode and ran her barn exactly the way you would expect a person to, who had been taught, from the time she could walk, that love was a thing you won and lost in a show ring on a Saturday. She was not stupid about horses. That was the tragedy of her. She knew a great deal, technically, about feet and feed and conformation and the rules of her sport. What she did not know, what nobody had ever taught her because nobody had ever shown it to her in her own life, was the one thing that actually matters, which is that you cannot force a living creature to trust you. You can only become worth trusting. And that fear, piled onto fear, does not make a brave horse. It makes a broken one, the same way it makes a broken person. She treated the help the way she treated the horses, as instruments that existed to perform and were worthy of notice only when they failed. In 3 weeks, she had never once asked my name. I was the old man, or just, "Hey, you." And that suited me fine, because a man who is invisible can watch everything. But it was not fine to watch her do it to Birdie. Birdie was 16, a local girl, thin as a rail, who worked off her riding lessons by mucking stalls and grooming and doing whatever Vivian's paying boarders did not want to do. She came from nothing, the same nothing I came from, a kid who loved horses with the whole of a heart that did not have many other places to put that love. And she was a natural, the kind of quiet, watchful, soft-handed natural that you cannot teach, and that the Vivian Cranes of the world cannot see because it does not come wrapped in money. Birdie was the only person in that barn the horses were not afraid of. She was the only person who was ever kind to Banjo, slipping him bits of her own lunch apple, talking to him soft over the door when she thought no one was around. And I knew the first time I saw her do it that she was one of mine, the same breed of person as the old man who taught me. And I started, quietly, without making anything of it, to teach her the things you cannot learn from a lesson book. In between the stalls, in the language of small remarks that a sharp kid picks up and a dull one misses. Birdie was not dull. Birdie soaked it up like dry ground soaks rain. I learned her story the way you learn a quiet kid's story, in pieces, between jobs. Her mother worked 2 shifts at a plant an hour off, and her father was a subject she did not raise. And she had found horses the way some children find God, as the first thing that ever made the world make any sense. She had walked 3 miles each way to that barn since she was 12, trading her labor for scraps of lesson time that Vivian doled out like she was doing the girl a favor by letting her shovel manure for free. She never once complained of it. She thought she was the lucky one. That is the thing about the real ones. They are so grateful for the small door the world cracks open for them that they never notice how badly they are being shorted. And somebody who loves them has to notice it for them and do something about it. Somebody had done that for me once. I had been waiting most of my life, it turned out, to do it for somebody else. Vivian was cruel to her in the offhand way that is almost worse than real cruelty, because there is no passion in it, no acknowledgement that the target is even a person whose feelings could be a consideration. She mocked Birdie's second-hand boots. She made her redo work that was already done right. And the week all of this came to a head, Vivian announced that a very important buyer was coming, a man from back east with serious money who was looking for a project horse with bloodlines, and that she intended to sell him Banjo, and that before he came, she was going to get that horse going under saddle properly if it killed them both. Which, the way she went about it, it very nearly did. What she did to that horse in the days before the buyer came, I will carry for the rest of my life. And I will keep most of it to myself, because some of it would do nobody any good to hear, and the horse deserves his privacy as much as a person would. I will tell you that she brought in harsher and harsher equipment, the way frustrated people always reach for a bigger hammer, and that she rode him with anger in her hands, and that every day the brave, curious colt I had raised sank further down inside the shaking animal she was creating. And every night I stood at his door and talked him back up an inch. And it became a kind of war between us, her tearing him down by day and me trying to keep a pilot light burning in him by night. And she had no idea she was in a war at all, because she had never once looked closely enough at the old man with the fork to see that his hands, when he reached over that door, were the surest hands she had ever had on the property. I lived for those nights. The fancy people would go home at dark, and the barn would settle into the realer version of itself. The breathing and the shifting, and the small sounds of 15 horses finally letting their guard down. And I would do my last checks, slow, and save Banjo for the end. I would not rush him. I would just be near, on the other side of the door, not asking a thing of him, which is the whole of it with a horse who has learned that people only ever come to take something. I talked to him about nothing. The weather, the mare he came from, the foolishness of the day, in the low voice. And night by night I watched him learn the shape of me again. The first night he let me lay a hand on his neck over the door. I sat down in the aisle afterward and put my hat over my face so the nightman would not catch a grown fellow crying over a horse that remembered him. You spend 8 years looking for one thing. You are owed a minute when you find it. The morning it broke open, she had Banjo in the big indoor arena, and the whole barn was there because the buyer was due that afternoon, and the air had that tight, performing feeling a place gets when money is coming. She was trying to load him onto a trailer, a practice run, because the horse had gotten so frightened of trailers under her that he would not load. And a horse that will not load is worth nothing to a buyer, and she was running out of time and patience, which is the most dangerous thing a frightened animal can be near. She had ropes on him. She had 2 grooms hauling. She had a long whip. And Banjo, who was not being stubborn but was simply more afraid than he could bear, did the thing terrified horses do, which is he came apart, exploded, reared and struck, and went over backwards, and nearly came down on top of one of the grooms. And there was a moment, a real one, where that 1,000-pound animal in his panic was going to hurt somebody badly or break a leg himself and have to be destroyed right there in the aisle. All because a woman who had been taught that fear is fixed with force could not understand why the force was not working. And Vivian Crane, white with fury and fear of her own, grabbed the whip and drew back to do the worst thing I had yet seen her reach for. And she screamed at the horse that he was a worthless, dangerous animal, and she should have put him down months ago. I am not going to pretend to you that what almost happened next was noble. The man who came up out of me in that second was not the patient old horseman who had held his tongue for 3 weeks. It was something older and harder. A man who had just watched a stranger raise a whip to the horse he raised from the straw. And for one white instant, I wanted to cross that arena and take the whip out of her hand in a way she would feel for a month. And let the whole barn see exactly who the dangerous animal in the building actually was. But you cannot gentle a frightened horse with an angry man's hands, and Banjo did not need my rage. He needed the one thing in the world that might still reach him, and rage was not it. So I did not cross that arena as the hard man. I let him go. And what I did instead, without deciding to, the way you do the truest things, was reach into my coat where it had ridden every day for 8 years and take out the soft braided rope halter I made for a colt a long time ago. And I walked out into the middle of that arena, slow, between the screaming woman and the exploding horse. And I started to talk. I did not talk to Vivian. I did not talk to the grooms or the gathered barn. I talked to the horse, low, in the voice I had used in the straw the night he was born, the voice I had used at his door every night for 3 weeks, the oldest voice he knew. And I said his name, his real name, the one I gave him, and I held up the halter where he could see it and smell it. And I asked everybody, quiet, to drop the ropes. They looked at Vivian, out of pure shock that the old man who mucked the stalls was standing in the middle of her arena giving orders. Did not say anything, and silence is a yes. So they dropped the ropes. And I stood there in the middle of all that fear with a soft halter in my hand, and 8 years of love in my voice. And I waited, the way you have to wait, because you cannot hurry the moment a frightened thing decides whether to trust you. You can only make yourself safe and let it choose. And Banjo stopped. He stopped, and his sides were heaving, and his eye was rolling white, and he was lathered with terror. And he looked at that old man and that old halter, and he heard that old voice saying the name nobody in that barn knew. And you could see it move through him. 8 years of fear cracking just slightly, just enough. As somewhere down in the place where horses keep their first truths, a brave, curious colt heard that the safe thing had come back. He took one step toward me, then another. And then that ruined, dangerous, condemned animal walked across the arena, through the dropped ropes, and put his big, terrified head flat against my chest and stood there, shaking, and let me slip the soft halter over his nose. The one that had always meant that Sai was here, and nothing bad was going to happen. And he let out a breath I think he had been holding for 8 years. I looked up once, over the horse's trembling back, and found Birdie at the rail with both hands pressed over her mouth and the tears running straight down without her seeming to know they were there. Because she, of every person in that barn, understood exactly what she was watching, having spent 3 weeks learning from me the very thing that was unfolding in front of her. She told me later it was the moment she decided what she was going to do with her life. The rest of the barn saw a miracle. Birdie saw a method. That is the whole difference between a spectator and a horseman. And watching her face, I knew the girl was going to be the real thing. The barn was dead silent. You could hear the horse breathing. And into that silence, an older woman, one of the boarders, a sharp-eyed horsewoman of the old school, who had been around long enough to know things, said the thing that ended Vivian Crane's whole world in 5 quiet words. She said, "My God, that's Sai Hatfield." There was satisfaction in the next part, and I will not insult you by pretending otherwise, but it arrived wearing a face I did not expect, and I want to be honest about that. Because as the recognition went around that barn, as people who knew the breeding world started to understand that the invisible old man cleaning the stalls was the horseman whose name was on the papers of half the good horses in that building, and that the wreck Vivian Crane had been about to destroy was a Hatfield-bred colt, his own, ruined under her hands. I did not feel triumph. I looked at Vivian Crane standing there with the whip going slack in her grip and her whole face coming apart. And what I felt, to my own surprise, was something closer to grief, because I had finally, in that moment, understood her. I had been watching her hands on that horse for 3 weeks, and now, watching her face, I saw the same thing in both, and it was not evil. It was the exact, identical fear she had been pouring into Banjo. She rode like someone was screaming at her. She trained like she would be punished if she failed. Somebody had done to Vivian Crane, a long time ago, precisely what she was now doing to my horse, had taught a frightened, eager little girl that love and worth were things you clawed for in a ring, and lost if you were not hard enough. And she had grown up and done the only thing the unloved know how to do with what was done to them, which is hand it down to whatever is smaller and more afraid than they are. She had not set out to ruin a great horse. She had been ruined, herself, decades ago, by the same hands disguised as a different person. And she had simply never once been shown that there was any other way to be. The whip in her hand was her mother's whip. She was just the latest one holding it. I had seen it 1,000 times before, though usually in the horses and not in the people riding them. You get a frightened animal in for training, and you can read its whole history in the first 10 minutes. Every hard hand it ever knew written into the way it flinches, and a horse passes along whatever it was taught to the next thing smaller than itself. A soured mare teaching her foal to be sour. On and on down the line. People are not so different. We are all of us carrying somebody else's hands. The only question that has ever mattered, with a horse or with a person, is whether you are going to be the one who finally stops handing the bad ones down. And most never are. Because stopping it means feeling the whole weight of the thing yourself and setting it down instead of passing it on, which is the hardest work a frightened creature is ever asked to do. Vivian Crane had never been asked to do it. Nobody had ever shown her it could be done. I did not forgive her, exactly, but I lost the ability to hate her. And on a long enough road, that is most of the way to the same place. That did not make it right. None of which gave her back the right to do what she did. Whatever had been done to Vivian Crane a long time ago, the horse breathing against my chest, was the bill for what she had done in her turn. and that bill was real, and it was hers to pay. But it took the meanness out of what I did next, and I am glad it did, because the meanness would have been mine to carry, and I did not want it. I did not give a speech. I did not tell that barn full of people what Vivian Crane was. I did not have to. The horse had already told them, more completely than any words of mine could have, because there is no testimony in the world as total as a condemned animal choosing, in front of everyone, the one set of hands in the building that had never hurt him. The buyer from back east arrived that afternoon to a barn that had already rearranged itself around a truth, and he was a real horseman under the money, the kind who had heard of Hatfield, and when he understood the whole of what had happened, he did not buy a horse from Vivian Crane. Nobody, it turned out, much wanted to buy a horse from Vivian Crane after that day, or send one to her, or be associated with the name, because the horse world is small and it talks, and the thing it cannot forgive, the one true sin in a world full of vanity and money, is cruelty to a good horse who did not deserve it. Her reputation, which was the only thing she had ever really been raised to build, came apart in a single afternoon, undone not by me, but by the animal she had spent months trying to break. The horse world is a small town, no matter how wide the country it is scattered across, and it keeps a long memory and one strict, unspoken law underneath all the money and the ribbons, which is that you may be vain in it, and you may be ruthless, and you may be very nearly anything and survive, except known, truly known, as someone who was cruel to a good horse for no reason but your own temper. That is the one thing it will not forgive, because in the end, every soul in that world, the snobs and the dealers and the dynasty children alike, is there for the same buried reason, which is that somewhere back in their lives, a horse saved them, and they never quite got over it. Word of that afternoon was 3 states away within the week. Boarders moved their horses out. The trainers, who had been glad of Vivian Crane's money, stopped returning her calls. I take no joy in a person losing their living, and I want to be careful saying so, but I will not pretend the world was wrong to turn. A barn is a place you are supposed to be able to trust with a frightened animal, and hers had quit being one, and the people voting with their trailers were not being cruel. They were doing the very thing she had never learned to do, which was stand up for the ones who could not stand up for themselves. I bought Banjo from her myself. I want to tell you I out-negotiated her, but the truth is plainer and sadder than that. By the end of that week, Vivian Crane could not get rid of that horse fast enough, because every time she looked at him, she saw the afternoon her whole world had been taken apart. And she sold him to the broke old hired man for almost nothing, just to have him gone. And I do not think she ever once understood that she was selling him back to the only home he had ever known. I loaded him onto my trailer with the soft halter on, and he walked right up the ramp he had been too afraid to load onto a week before, because I was at the top of it. And he came home with me to nothing, to a leased paddock and a tack room I sleep in some nights, which is a smaller life than he was born to. And he has never been happier, because a horse does not count acres. He counts whether the hands that come to him in the morning are kind. The part of this I am proudest of is Birdie. When I left Vivian Crane's barn, I did not leave her in it. I had been quietly teaching that girl for 3 weeks the things that take most people 30 years to learn. And she had a gift that the world was going to waste behind a manure fork in a barn that did not value her. And I was not going to let that happen, because somebody once did not let it happen to me. She works with me now. She is my apprentice, which is a grand word for a kid who does most of the hard labor and gets paid mostly in knowledge. But she knows what she is getting, because she is sharp, and she is going to be better than me someday, better than I ever was. And when people send their ruined horses up our way in a few years, it is going to be Birdie Mathis's hands they are hoping for. And they will be right to. I am teaching her everything, and the day she fixed her first hard case on her own, a little mare nobody could catch, I watched her do it from the fence and did not say a word. And when she was done, I did the only thing that felt big enough. I taught her how to braid a rope halter, the soft kind, out of cotton cord. And I told her to make her own, and to put it on the first horse she ever truly brings back, so it learns. The way they learn the deepest things, that when that halter is on, Birdie is there, and nothing bad is going to happen. I kept Banjo's, the original. It is hanging on a nail by his stall where I can see it, soft and grey with 8 years of my pocket. And I am not going to give it to anybody, because that one is his and mine. The proof of a promise I broke once when I sold him, and have spent every day since keeping. That one stays with me. It is the receipt on a promise I broke the day I sold him, and have been paying back every day since. So here is what I want to leave you with, from an old man who has spent his life learning one thing slowly from horses. Fear does not fix fear. You cannot frighten a frightened thing into being brave, not a horse, not a child, not a person. And everyone who has ever tried has only ever made another frightened thing that will someday hand the fear down to whatever is smaller than it. The only thing that has ever turned a scared creature brave in the whole history of scared creatures is somebody choosing, patiently, against all the evidence the creature throws at them, to simply be worth trusting, and to keep being worth it until the fear runs out. That is the entire secret. It works on horses, and it works on people, and it is the hardest, slowest, most worthwhile work there is. Tell me in the comments about the person, or the animal, who taught you that you could trust again after somebody taught you that you could not. I read every one. And if there is something frightened in your life right now, a creature or a person or the scared part of your own self, do not reach for the whip. Reach for the halter. Be the safe thing. Be worth their trust. And wait. They come back. They almost always come back. If somebody is finally willing to be worth coming back to.